videos by the review of that anime which will never be mentioned again, I like to mix things up by reviewing down here. In this case, it's mostly out of necessity. I can't buy or rent everything, so I have to use BitTorrent. You see, there are a lot of shows that just aren't localized yet. In the case of the show I'm doing today, it probably never will be.
Now, I'm not saying it's bad or anything. It's just straight up weird. You thought Ren and Stimpy was out of this world? That doesn't even hold a candle to today's show.
And what's today's show? Goodbye, Mr.
Weeaboo.
Sayonara, Zetsubou-Sensei.
The premise of the show is that there's an extremely depressed teacher named Itoshika Nozomu who's constantly trying to kill himself, but is never able to. He's the kind of guy that can only find the negatives in life. The play on words is that when his name is written from top to bottom, like traditional Japanese, it ends up spelling despair. Weeaboo. Or Zetsubou. This is gonna happen on review, isn't it? In fact, wordplay is something the show does very well. All the characters' names are abstract descriptions of their personalities. Most of them are actually done in funny and clever ways. Like, check out this girl. Her name is Chirikitsu, and she's an anal retentive meat freak. This character trait is seen most obviously when she's tasked with dividing up a cake into exactly equal pieces, and she pretty much shreds it into slivers. Subsequently, her name is derived from the Japanese word precision, but it can also mean clairvoyance, as she exhibits limited psychic powers over the series, and Barry, as her weapon of choice during a fight, is a fucking shovel. This sort of thing can be found in every character's name. And for us people who weren't born a member of the glorious Japanese master race, the end of each episode has a neat explanation of the puns in each new character's name, all set to Bobby McFerrin's Don't Worry, Be Happy. I think these segments are a product of the fan subbers, as a Japanese viewer probably wouldn't need it, but I've seen them in every single version of the show I've downloaded so far. Either way, their style fits in quite well with the rest of the show.
Which leads to something else. What is up with this class? This is the weirdest class I've ever seen in any anime. Hands down.
We've got the main character who's constantly depressed and his counterpart, a young girl who can only see the bright side of life. We've got the perfectionist who I described earlier. Then we've got a character who's constantly covered in bandages, presumably to give the show some Rei Ayanami-style wank bait. A cross between the lolly and a shut-in, a weird combination of a stalker and a mime, an amateur cartoonist who focuses on gay porn, a Filipino illegal, an internet addict. God, they even make a point of introducing a character whose only eccentric trait is that she's normal. And each of them gets their own personal trip through a cross-cultural anus. Some of the wordplay stuff employed actually ties into the larger theme and plot of the show, which is all about critiquing Japanese society.
And if there's one society that needs critiquing, it's Japan.
Through the overall plot of the show is Mr. Zetsubou-Sensei's daily life as a teacher, each episode following an extremely oddball formula. For instance, one of the main characters will mention a Japanese cultural practice or mode of thought, and the class will spend the entire episode dissecting it, overinflating it to its logical extremes, and recognizing how absolutely absurd it really is. This actually adds to a recurring trend I've noticed in anime teachers. They all seem to be more than willing to teach something, but rarely is it anything you're actually supposed to learn in school. But then we start getting into some of the really weird stuff. Some of these topics that the kids spin off into are really, really off the wall. For example, when the cultural festival rolls around, our hero decides that because he has a class full of absolutely worthless people, that their exhibit must be at the minimum cultural standard possible in order to not waste culture. This black hole is a result. You can just feel it sucking the fun and goodwill out of everybody that happens to wander in. Another great example is the concept of original way. In Japanese culture, a lot of people use this as a scapegoat. They simply follow in someone else's footsteps and claim that if something goes wrong, they can't be faulted for it because they just were following the original way. Zetsubou extends this concept to its extremes. even making Original Way, a physical street in Tokyo in which various people run down to escape the masses of angry people chasing them. Eventually, the concept expands, leading to Weatherman's Way for whenever the weather report is wrong, Recipe Way for whenever a meal turns out badly, and so on. It's surreal parody at its best, but it's definitely not for everybody. Also, why do all the girls have raging clit hard-ons for him? Pretty much every girl he comes into contact with ends up falling for him. Unlike other anime leads, he's not oblivious to their feelings, but instead he just doesn't care. Of course, each girl shows affection in their own way, usually injuring, depressing, or annoying their teacher.
Now, normally I'd be pretty appalled at the idea of a potential relationship between a high school student and her teacher, but since these crushes seem to be one-sided and for the most part pretty innocent, it seems fairly normal for a high school girl. Besides, it's a lot better than sitting through teacher popping wood over a 9-year-old, which has made me pretty numb to this sort of thing.
Also, what's with the suicide? People attempt to kill themselves multiple times every episode, and not only is it treated in a lighthearted manner, it's almost always encouraged. Is it really worth killing yourself over not having any ID on you, for example? I mean, I dig it, it's straight up black humor, but those of you who like lighter fare should probably stay away. Probably the weirdest way suicide is confronted is in the first episode of the show, when Kafka talks about her dad. Only she thinks he was trying to grow taller by stretching himself out, rather than hanging himself. Yet another fucked up thing is the use of antiquities in this show. Despite it taking place in 2007, the main teacher and all his students dress as if it was the early 1900s. It also looks like you're watching the show through a grainy filter, giving it an old-school film effect. The technology is also aged, the cars look to be turn-of-the-century jalopies, and so on. Even the dating system is different. Under the Japanese calendar system, the era changes with every new emperor on the throne. If you went to Japan when the show was new, you'd see Heisei 20 on every calendar for the year, but in this show, it becomes Showa 83, Showa being the era during the reign of Emperor Hirohito, who reigned during the Second World War. All of these things come together to give Sayonara Zetsubou-Sensei a feel that's more otherworldly and dated. And then there's just the weird stuff. Whose face is this, and why does it keep appearing? Why is there a penguin, and why does its face look like a yin-yang with two yins? And most importantly of all, what's with the fan service? Some shows have fan service in the form of sexual content that's plot relevant. Some shows simply have random panty shots with the characters on screen seemingly oblivious to the viewer's gaze. But goodbye, Mr. Sayonara Zetsubou-Sensei's fan service is far beyond any of that. It's very clearly hypersexual, as shown with the random panty shots of the blonde girl, or the almost lesbian encounters between the hikikomori and the school psychiatrist. But the characters seem to be aware of their actions, and even of the viewer during these scenes, to the point of absolute absurdity. Don't get me wrong, it is fan service, but it's also a parody of other anime that indulge in fan service, and yet it goes even further and wraps back in on itself to become something else entirely. As for the season finale, well, there really isn't one. Oh, sure, they try to play up the final episode as if it were some kind of grand finale with the main lead getting seriously injured and his entire class hanging out in the hospital worried about him. But this pretense quickly dissolves and the show returns to its regular formula of cultural critique and bizarre humor about 2 minutes into the episode. I know I've complained a lot about shows being formulaic in previous reviews, but this is one series where they really don't need to change anything up because the constant parody of otaku culture really works well.
Now this show has several seasons, which is kind of unusual for an anime, especially one that's odd. They took the formula and basically kept going with it, following the tried and true idea of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And really, it works out fine, because, well, the original show was so good, there's really nothing to be improved on.
Zoku begins with a quick recap of how Zetsubou got to be in his current predicament. The only problem is it's a complete and total lie. The recap talks about how he was the head of a pyramid scheme and then was pursued by an insane cult, and then was transformed via genetic resequencing Sheesh. Why'd they do this? Are they intentionally trying to fuck with the heads of new viewers? What a bunch of dicks.
And you know what? There's a third season coming out, too. Started this past summer, and there's already a lot of fanfare about it. And me, I honestly can't wait to see it. Really. It's called Sayonara Zetsubou-Sensei. And it follows the same pattern of adding a prefix onto the original name. In this instance, Zen means
Repent!
ha! That is the problem with anime.
Subtitles are such fucking bullshit. When I want to go and watch something on my TV, I'm watching it. It is a visual medium. People have asked me several times now why whenever I watch an anime that has both an English dub and a Japanese dub with subtitles, I always roll with the English dub. The truth is, I'm really not interested in reading a fucking novel displayed sentence by sentence on the bottom corner of my TV screen while I'm lounging on my couch. Hell, there's one episode where the entire cast talks in random nonsense and noise with Japanese subtitles translating what they're supposed to be saying. Think Greedo in Star Wars or something. However, for most of the episode, the gibberish voice work is translated twice, with both translations having different meanings. And then to make it worse, watching a fan sub made for English audiences has both sets of Japanese subtitles translated to two sets of English subtitles, creating two different storylines that gradually diverge throughout the episode while still connecting back to the actual images being shown on the screen in a reasonable way. And to top it off, occasionally the Japanese Raw episode will thumb its nose at the English fan sub community by adding its own nonsense English plastered all over the screen. What you get is a convoluted mess that's almost impossible to follow.
I am in despair! An anime with subtitles has left me in despair!
Weeaboo.
メールじゃ毒舌。君のような人がネットで私の悪口を書くのですね。でもあったらおとなしくて礼儀正しいから怒るに怒れないんですね。もうひいきするのはやめます。絶望した。ネット社会に絶望した。